All right, hey guys, Dr. Sean here. We're going to do a mailbag segment here today, and I got to ask the question, says, Doc, what do you think about the MTHFR gene and the gene factor and all the stuff that we're seeing on it right now? Because we're testing for it like crazy, more than we ever have before. Now, I started thinking, all right, so what is it? Let's start there, right? MTHFR. It's a great big long set of acronyms, right? It's methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. We'll stick with MTHFR. So this little word, what does it mean? It helps the body to absorb B vitamins, okay, in this case folate. It may help with other nutrients and vitamins, and it might help with digestion to some degree. We're not real sure on that entirely as of yet. We know it has some factors, but we also know, boy, it seems to be showing up all the time lately. You didn't hear about this 10 years ago, and now all of a sudden here it is everywhere. So let's look into it a little bit. It's become the darling of all these genetic tests that are out there right now. You've got different companies out there, 23andMe and several others, that are saying, hey, look, $150, $200, $250, we'll test for this thing. And if we find it, ooh, you got to run and hide. Now, the claim for this, and why they like it, they have a gene A, they can prove that there may be a little defect in it, and that's okay. But what's that really mean? What does a defect mean? Guys, we all have genes that have defects. It's a normal course of being us, right? The body mutates little things, it adapts little things. Nothing comes out of clone perfection every time. You can't take twins and have them turn out the same, right? We're all a little bit different. We all have different tendencies, different environmental factors, different stresses that affect the body, and that's what causes a gene to express itself. So one of the things I see with this that bothers me is what I would call a little bit of fear-mongering, right? We get everyone nervous. Oh my gosh, you could have miscarriages. You might have neural tube defects with a baby. Well, that'll make any young mother nervous. Chronic headaches, nerve problems, anxiety, depression, bipolarism, schizophrenia, heart conditions could be linked to this. Or so they claim. Now, here's where it gets tricky. How do they claim this? Is it the gene defect that does this, or something that's associated with it? And this is where you got to be careful. So it's kind of like, is it the person robbing the bank or the guy sitting out front in the car? That maybe just driving by, he just parked there and he gets associated with them. So let's look at this. What are they looking for? The key to this is not the gene defect, because when you look at genetics, to have a true genetic defect, okay, something like Down syndrome or Klinefelter's or trisomy 21, something of that nature. According to the genetic group that's out there studying this, they'll say that roughly 2% of the globe's population has a true, full, all-out genetic defect. So we look at that and think, all right, 2%. That means 98% of the roughly 8 billion people on the planet don't. So right away, I'm thinking, all right, well, let's compare the numbers. What percentage of people have the MTHFR gene defect? According to most recent research, it's somewhere between 40 and 60% of the U.S. population. So if you just look at that right away, 40, just call it 50% in the middle. 50% of the people in this country have some variant, strain, or change or defect in that particular MTHFR gene. So we look at that and we say to ourselves, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. The geneticists are telling us that only 2% of the population globally has a major gene defect, and yet here we are with half of ours. It makes no sense. So right away, that's flag number one. I watch that and I start questioning things now. The next thing you look at is say, okay, for a gene to express itself, right? Genes, guys, do nothing. They're a book, right? They literally are a manual. How to build this, how to bake that. If you don't open it, start reading through it, and then take action on it, it does nothing. It just sits there. So we look at that and think to ourselves, well, gosh, something must be influencing the gene so it expresses itself. That's your environment. And that is the field of epigenetics. It means above the gene, how your life, your stresses, your environment put signals into the body, and the gene then gets pulled off the shelf and starts to express itself. It never does it on its own, ever. Never will a gene just randomly express itself. It only does it when it gets a signal from the environment. So that's another thing that I start thinking about. I said, okay, well, so then the world I live in, the environment I'm in, it all affects this. So I need to watch that if I'm worried about catching this condition or that issue or whatever it is. So then we take it another step further. When they're looking at this thing, we say, well, what are they looking for? Is it the gene defect that they're going off of and collecting all this data? No. It's a marker called homocysteine. Homocysteine is an inflammatory marker, like C-reactive protein in the blood. You can measure it, and the higher the homocysteine levels go, the more likely the body has chronic, unchecked inflammation. So we say, oh, we've heard that word before, inflammation. That's at the heart of all kinds of stuff. Heart disease, diabetes, cancer, strokes, fertility issues, schizophrenia, bipolarism, depression, inflammation unchecked has been linked to all of those. So then I say, well, wait a minute, that's their whole list that they're tying to this gene. And I start thinking, how do they make this connection? Well, turns out that if you have the MTHFR gene and it is somehow defective, I guess we'll call it that, it's mutated in one way or another, then it can increase your homocysteine levels. So now it brings us to the next question. How high is too high? Right? If you were to fall down a flight of stairs and hurt your back and it never heals and you go 6 months, 8 months, a year with it, what would that do to your homocysteine levels? Guess what? Up they go. If I ate poorly for the next 2 years and I gained 20 pounds, what would that do to my homocysteine levels? Up they go. So I'm thinking to myself, so the gene raises it, but so do all these other factors. So then we look at this and we say, okay, well, how much does it raise it? And this is the great part of this. We're all scared to death and, oh my gosh, I've got this genetic thing. That means something's broken. I'm in trouble. What am I going to do? The homocysteine levels that raise with the MTHFR gene raise so low that they don't set off any of the major markers over here for the diseases. So now I come back to this thing saying, so you're telling me that the levels are so low, they're not even associated with these. But if the levels are higher, then yes, they would match it. And they took that information and said, look, homocysteine levels are going up. Tell everyone to be afraid. So I have a real problem with this, right? It's a real issue, but it's a great marketing tool. It's a great selling point. It's a great thing to say, gosh, we can take our genetic tests that we can tell you, you've got this problem. You better run and hide. You better go do something about it. You better go get some kind of care. Really? I don't know. Don't be so afraid. Go back to the basics. And so let's look at that next step. What do you do if you do have it? What do you do if you're a young mother and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm worried. I don't know what to do. Go back to the basics. What's the cause of all disease? It's stress. It always has been. What's the cause of all stress? Men. Flat out. It's men that deal with it, guys. It's mechanical stresses on the body, emotional stresses on the body, and nutritional chemical ones. You look at those things, you think to yourself, gosh, if I can just balance out my body, try to clean up most of my environmental stresses, things that send signals into those genes, if I can help the body deal with those better, then guess what? They don't express themselves. That's how this works. CDC, World Health Organization, Harvard Medical School, Penn State did a phenomenal study on this, finding that as long as you don't feed the bear, it just stays dormant. It just stays sleeping. What feeds the bear? That's the next thing. I run an IUP in my practice. It's an integrated urinalysis panel. I talk about it all the time on here. And you guys hear me discussing the words epigenetic. That's what it is. It's an epigenetic profile. It's great to know you got a gene for something, but if you're not watering it, who cares? You want to know, am I potentially watering my genetic defects? Am I feeding my genetic weaknesses? If I'm eating into them or I'm doing something to feed that bear, I better learn, I need to stop and eat the other direction. Eat my way back out of my defects. That's what we do. Now, can you take folate and folic acid and all these things? Sure you can. You can try to do all that stuff, but how would you really know if you truly need it? And then how would you know if it's working? Right? That's the key, guys. To see is to know. To not see is to guess. So you run a panel, you run something that kind of tells you. Now, you can increase foods in your diet that are high in folate, which is great. You know, proteins, of course, almost always are. Most of the meats and things are high in B vitamins. Your green leafy vegetables, some nuts and seeds will have it, some berries. Those are all things you can do. You can put those in your diet, but you should be doing those anyway, shouldn't you? That's how you prevent this stuff. And understand that folic acid and folate, not the same animal. Folate is the natural form of that B vitamin. Folic acid is a man-made synthetic. And so sometimes it doesn't get the job done. So I hope this helps you. I hope this gives you some idea. Don't be too afraid of this thing, okay? We've done a lot of research on it. There's a lot out there in the medical communities on this thing. There's a lot of hype around it because it's a flag that they can say, oh, look, you have it. But remember, it didn't pass our test. Lots of people have it, so that automatically makes us question things. The levels that they're looking at don't get high enough, and there's many, many, many things that raise it much, much higher than they do, but they're using that then to say, oh, well, look at all these diseases that are associated not with the MTHFR, but with the homocysteine levels. Keep them low, keep your stress down, do an IUP, figure out where that body's getting pushed too hard. Support those things. Get the stress off the body. Take care of those unruly men, and the body will do really, really, really good. Hope this helps you, and I hope you had fun with it. I'm Dr. Sean, the Robin Hood of Healthcare. Bye-bye.